conversations. Let's have real conversations.
Get ready to stir it up.
Life events and everything in between. Let's go.
Get ready to stir it up.
No capping. If guests got you covered right up.
Get ready to stir it up. Stir it up.
Come on.
Get ready to stir it up.
Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Stir It Up. We have a popular guest, Carol. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
We are going to be talking about families that are trying to have children and how they navigate those waters. And it's quite a sensitive conversation, so correct me at any point in time if I use inappropriate vocabulary or I use a phrase that's not sensitive or culturally right. I will start off talking about my 9-month experience. So when I first got married, I had said I didn't want to have kids immediately. I had all these plans for what I wanted for myself.
Yeah.
And I remember that within 6 weeks of getting married, I would have, so when are you having a child? So when are you guys getting pregnant? And very quickly, it became very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I remember there was this day an aunt of mine had asked me, and my dad was there. And I said, well, blotting out her name, I said, what's it to you if I have a kid or not? And I said, and what role are you going to play in my child's life when I have that child? And she was offended.
Yeah.
But at that time, I was probably 8 months in, and I'd had it from being asked that question. And well, the message went around very quickly that, Ikea is, she's very rude, don't ask her anything. So I can only imagine how hard when a couple's been trying for some time, and the pressures, the societal pressures, the questions that are asked, the insensitivities that come along, the culture pressures and all of that. And one of the things I've absolutely found incredible is how courageous you've been about sharing your own stories, but also talking about it, because it's one of the conversations that we don't want to have. We want to pretend like it doesn't exist, and we cower from it. So I'll start off by saying well done.
Thank you.
That you have that courage. And I will ask where you get that courage from.
It doesn't always feel courageous. But I think two things. For me, I'm really big on, I navigate difficult situations when I can give it meaning. And I think for my own personal, experiences with infertility or the difficulty starting a family, I needed to find some meaning to help me navigate a lot of what I'm dealing with. And for me, that meaning is in talking about it. Because when I go through things, maybe by virtue of the work that I do, I immediately start to think about how other people going through the same things are navigating it. And I know because of the work I do in mental health, I know that a big part of distress has to do with the fact that when people are going through things, they often feel as though they are going through them all by themselves. And we kind of go through things in these silos because, like I was saying, we don't have these conversations. So people start to feel as though, okay, is it just me? Like, is anybody else? Because everybody else seems to be fine, right? Everybody else seems to, so am I the only one struggling? And so I felt as though it's important for anybody else going through what I'm going through to know that, okay, you are not the only one. Because there's some comforts that comes with that. And so I think it comes from me needing to find meaning and put the pain and the hurt and the frustration, channel it into something positive that I felt would impact other people. And then generally, I'm also, I think much like you, very much interested in having conversations that I think as a culture we don't have. Things that people are living with every day that are big parts of their lives, but we just don't talk about it. And so I think those would be my two main things that keep me going. Like I said, I don't feel courageous every day. But that's what definitely drives me.
I can imagine that you would have days where it doesn't feel like you are a warrior princess having that conversation. I can see how that is true, and I can see how some days the conversations might come from different places. You know, experience, someone helping someone else, trying to inspire someone, and. So, have you been able to begin to build a community around the subject, or are there people who will open up about? Are people talking more about this in the community that you are building, be it on social or through your work?
Definitely. So once I started talking about my personal experiences, the number of both men and women who reached out, kind of navigating the same thing. So in that sense, some community building is happening, but the sad thing is, really and truly, people are still very hesitant to talk about it. It's still very much shrouded in nobody wants everybody to kind of know what they're going through. So you'll have people reach out to me, but then say, you know, they really just want to keep it between the two of us. You know, you'll suggest things like, you think a support group might be helpful, and then it's like, are there other people going to be there? I'm not sure if I want
know
people
them.
to
Do
know
they
them.
know me?
You know, because our crowd is really
So small.
Actually, it's interesting. I actually had a program on BBC Africa reach out, wanting to find out if myself, together with, you know, other women, they were interested in women specifically who had reached out, would be willing to come and share their stories, and
Nobody wanted to,
right? So there's definitely the need to connect and feel as though I'm not going through this alone, but I think people are still very much aware of a lot of the cultural shame and stigma and difficulty attached to it. So there's some community building that's happening, but I think it would be a lot more effective if we were navigating that shame aspect of it as well. But definitely lots of people reaching out, definitely.
So, when a couple is trying to start a family, we instinctively think it's the woman who's struggling to have the children.
Yeah.
And sometimes the reality is it's the man.
Yeah.
I think that even thinking about it in terms of whose fault is it is sometimes a big issue, in my opinion, as an outsider looking in.
Yeah.
In my view, a couple become one.
Yeah.
And in that oneness, it's not about laying blame. It's about how they deal with it as a unit.
As a unit, right.
So I'm hoping that as we have this conversation, it's not about infertility or impotence. It's about a couple trying to start a family.
Yeah.
And how they go through that as a unit, and how what they deal with, but more importantly, how they're able to stick through it together.
Yeah, right.
Because that's how it should be. It shouldn't be a finger pointing exercise, right?
Yeah.
So maybe it would be good to just understand that as a unit, what are some of the struggles that we need to be mindful of that they go through as a couple who are navigating this?
I think, and I'm really glad you're positioning it as that, because I think it's one of the issues that people discuss in a very kind of divisive kind of way. I think one of the most common things that come up for couples is grief, right? And people don't always recognize or understand why grief is present, but is this idea that, you know, you get married, a lot of people want to start a family when they get married, and then when you start to deal with the challenges more and more, that dream or that hope or that vision you had, you know, in terms of a family, that slowly kind of is taken away. And so there's a lot of grief that comes with that, with the loss of what you hoped could be, right? So I think a lot of couples navigating difficulties around starting a family are definitely dealing with a lot of grief, and, you know, as individuals and then as a unit. I think the other thing that we have to be mindful of is the fact that they're experiencing it differently causes conflict right? Because once again, like you said, depending on who the reason may lie with, in terms of who may have a condition or maybe impotent or infertile, right? They're experiencing it differently, right? I know that a lot of people, for the people who might have the issue, there's a lot of guilt that comes along with, okay, because of me, my partner has to deal with this, right? And so the fact that they are dealing with a common issue, but kind of coming at it and experiencing it from two different places, that can kind of cause some friction between couples in terms of figuring out ways to support each other, but also kind of navigate the situation. And then I think another thing is definitely dealing with the outside noise and kind of figuring out how you get to a place where you cocoon yourself and say, okay, this is our thing. These are the decisions we are making about it. And whatever the outside noise is, you know, we're sticking with our decision. And that can be really difficult. And then the finances of it, which is what I think we don't talk about when we talk about when people are trying to start families in non-traditional ways. It is expensive, right? Even when you think about technology-assisted ways like IVF and whatever it might be, or if you're using a donor, whatever, it's expensive. And so for a lot of couples, it takes a toll on their finances, and that has a trickle-down effect of causing challenges.
You know, as you spoke, what I noticed is it's like any other problem one would have. But because there's so much culture and expectation around it and societal norms that as soon as you get married, you should have kids, we don't realize that it's just like going bankrupt.
Right.
Or living with some terminal, it's a big thing, right?
Yeah.
And that is maybe one of the things that we should be mindful of, that it's not a small thing for whoever's going through or the couple that's going through that. I want to stick a little bit with the outside noise you talk about, because I think that it becomes the focus. Because as a couple, you end up trying to manage all the noise and the people making the noise. And instead of spending your energy protecting yourself and holding each other and trying to find your way through through it. Why do you think the outside noise exists?
That's a big question. I think the outside noise exists because there's an expectation of sort of like, whether it's keeping the family name going, or there's an expectation that you will fulfill certain duties, right? And you know, this thing we talk about in terms of here in our culture, you're not just marrying the individual, you're marrying the family. So I think when people get married, families have expectations in terms of, you're married not just for being married, but you're married to procreate, to give me some grandkids, you know, whatever it is. And so I think there's that. And then I also think, just because for a lot of people, the outside noise often starts with family, extended family, and then society. You know, I was reading somewhere, and it's not just a cultural thing, that globally, right, that couples experiencing infertility or, you know, or challenges with starting a family, the outside noise really is also about this sense that as humanity, right, we all have a role to play in terms of keeping humanity going, right? And one of the things is that, you know, as a unit, as a couple, you're supposed to procreate. And there's that expectation that you will procreate and kind of contribute to keeping humanity going. But thirdly, I also think culturally we have, because we're more of a communal kind of people, that we think everybody's problem, everybody's issue is our issue.
It's the community's issue.
It's the community's issue, right? So I have a right to speak on it, whether it, you know, solicited or not. Is your issue, so is my issue. So there are no boundaries in terms of people understanding that it's like you're saying, it's a challenge that the couple is trying to navigate.
Do you think we are becoming a little sensitive to having these conversations with couples that are waddling through the waters?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
I think we're shifting. I think once again it's a generational thing, and I think the further down you go in terms of for the younger generation, having children is not as big of a deal as it is, or as it has
been in the past.
So for a lot of them, it's not that big of an issue. So talking about it really isn't that much of a big deal. So there's definitely a shift that's happening, but I do think that once again we still have a long way to go, right? Because you still hear a lot of the insensitive comments and remarks and questions and conversations that are often placed as coming from a good place. Oh, I'm concerned, or I meant well. Or,
are they really concerned?
They believe they are, right? And they believe they have spotted a problem, and so they are coming to you with their concerns and often solutions. A lot of the insensitivity comes from just people offering solutions. And I remember talking to a lady who's navigating the same thing, and her frustration is, listen, there's no solution you're coming to offer me that I haven't thought about. Like, nothing you're going to tell me to research that my doctors and I haven't spoken about, right? But the solutions, people constantly throwing solutions and suggestions at you in terms of things you should try and do.
So it's a coincidence that you talk about that, because there's a conversation I've had around throwing the solutions at you. Mm-hmm. And the comment the lady made was, I know what my options are. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the options are not as easy for me as you would think they are. And she talked about the finances of it, for example. She talked about, so in that conversation, we had spent a bit of time talking about surrogacy. Mm-hmm. And she said, you know, there's so many people who struggle even with surrogacy, with bonding with the child after. So it's not like I don't know what the options are, but I know myself, and I know that I don't bond with kids that easily. Yeah. So I feel like if I was going to have, someone else is going to have a child for me, I might not ever bond with that child. And I'm afraid I will not bond with that child. Yeah. And as she said it, I had never thought about it that way. But that's her reality, isn't it? Yeah. So maybe it's also, as you say, how do we become more sensitive to other people? A lot of the time, we react differently as men and women. Mm-hmm. When men will minimize and hide and protect if it was their partner who was the reason. Mm-hmm. Does it matter where the problem comes from?
I think it shouldn't matter.
It shouldn't. Ideally.
It shouldn't. Right. Because like you said, it's like any other problem that as a unit you are navigating. So it really shouldn't be about the problem and how the problem came about. It really should be about we're a unit and we're figuring this problem out. But I think to some extent also we cannot be naive about the fact that depending on who the challenge lies with, like I said earlier, the experience of it will be different. Right, so they are navigating things that their partner may not necessarily be navigating, right? Specifically, a lot of guilt. And so I think there has to be an awareness as a couple and with themselves as individuals that we are experiencing a common thing, but we're experiencing it quite differently. But really, it shouldn't matter, because at the end of the day, whoever it is that the problem is with, the end result is that as a unit, you can't start a family the traditional way, right? So staying focused on where the problem is coming from really doesn't lead you to it doesn't lead to a solution any quicker, right? But unfortunately and culturally as well, it it does become the focus of it. Where, like you said, a lot of people presume that it's the woman, and a lot of women, like you said, will actually lie and protect their husbands, where the reverse isn't
necessarily
it doesn't happen that way. Yeah. But the presumption is that is the woman. Right.
Okay. I'm hoping that we can help someone out there in this conversation. Where should they look to for support as a couple? Because traditionally it would be the church. But and more people feel like the church is not the safest place because of the comments. It's the outside influence we talk about. And I don't say this as a way of being derogatory to the church or anything, but the church is made up of flawed people. So you've been married 4 years, you go into church and say, oh, sister Blessing, God will do it for you, right? And I've heard people say that amplifies the fact that I have a problem.
Exactly.
Right? And I don't want that amplification.
Exactly.
I'm already trying to minimize it and find my way. Family is commenting. As a couple, like you said, you're navigating it in different ways, and there's a push and there's a pull, and sometimes you get couples that you bond together, and sometimes you get couples that it rips them apart. Where do these couples, what kind of support exists in the universe of support that they can tap into?
Unfortunately, here in Ghana, not too much. There aren't too many places to plug into. There are some organizations and kind of people trying to do some work around bringing people together. But once again, because of the shame, a lot of couples really like to keep to their silos. It's sad because, a lot of the typical social support system should be, right? But a lot of couples don't find support in those places. So I encourage couples to lean on each other, right? I encourage couples to lean on, for a lot of couples, a lot of support comes from friendships, right? Sort of brotherhoods and sisterhoods that they formed around them, with friends, with other couples who've navigated it before. And I think each and every couple, unfortunately, has to build that support system around them for themselves. It's interesting you talked about the church, because I had a conversation with a lady who said for her, it's even, she stopped going to church completely. And it was really about how testimonies were shared about women or couples who couldn't have children and have now had children, because a lot of them are shared from the perspective of, their shame having been taken away and God being a shame lifter and all of that. And for her, it was like, okay, on the one hand, I'm being told that there's nothing to be ashamed of because I can't have a child, but then I go to church and the narrative is that I haven't been able to have a child. Now I've had a child, and somehow some shame that I wasn't supposed to be feeling has been lifted. Yeah. Right. So all these sort of miracle success stories being shared as testimonies, and they not having, because I spoke to a pastor once, and he said the idea is that it should encourage other women, but it ends up having the opposite effects for some women.
For many women,
because the reality is not everybody ends up with a miracle. With a miracle baby. So there aren't a lot of places to plug in for support, unfortunately. And that's why I think it becomes even more crucial to hold on to each other, like you said. But then also be intentional about building your community, right? The people that you feel emotionally safe with, whether it's friends, whether it's family, there might be a family member who, thinks about it differently, and kind of leading into those people and receiving help and support when they give it.
How do we get people to be more sensitive? So I know what you do about talking about it, the social conversations on social media is a starting point. How do we make it, let our mothers and our aunties and our cousins and our brothers and our sisters and our church mates know that it's none of your damn business.
I think we need to keep the conversations going, but I also think that the conversations need to be had by people who are not experiencing the challenge, right? Because a lot of what you find, much like everything else, when I am going through something, I tend to get very vocal about it, right? But I also think, and I tell this people all the time, that I think families and couples and women and men who haven't had challenges with infertility, they need to start talking about it, right? So whether it's within a friend group, whether it's within a family group where somebody is, you're sitting in a family gathering, you have your 3 kids, you notice that a cousin is being kind of like pummeled with questions about, you say something, right?
So it's the bystander.
It's the bystander effect, right? This idea that there are so many of us here, surely somebody will say something, but then nobody does. And I keep telling people it's important that the responsibility of having the conversation and educating people doesn't fall squarely on the shoulders of the people that are actually going through it.
Because it's not a big number of people as well.
It's not a big number of people. And in addition to trying to navigate it, also then having to educate people about it is so exhausting. It's really exhausting. And so I think as in our little communities, we need to look out for each other. We need to make it a conversation that everybody feels responsible for, so that it doesn't just fall to the feet of the people that are navigating it.
Coming back to the couple, not everyone survives.
Right. Sadly.
And what you find is not every couple has that united front. I find that they themselves as a unit need tooling, and they need a certain level of understanding. But the noise you talk about and the tension and the expectation that you talk about is a bit of a push and pull factor. For a woman who's going through this, feeling the shame, feeling the grief, feeling the anxiety, feeling like she's failed and all of that, looking, exploring her options, all the things that she's done. At what point in time does she say, I'm not doing this anymore? Does she earn the right to say, I'm not doing this anymore after 5 rounds of failed IVF? Right? At what point in time is it okay to say, enough is enough? I'm not going to put my mind, my body, my heart, my emotions through this mill. Or for the man as well. At what point in time, and I know it will be different for everybody, I know it's not a one size fits all, but is it okay to do that, and when do you do that?
It's absolutely okay to do that, and there are lots of people who have and do, because the reality is it is grueling, right? So it's absolutely okay for you to get to a point where you say, I'm not doing this anymore. But the reality also, Ikuya, is that for a lot of, I find this more with women, for a lot of women, it's a really hard point to reach. And I think it has to do with the fact that women are socialized in very implicit ways, right from when you're young, to associate their value as a woman, as a human being, to the ability to reproduce. And so for a lot of women to step away from that journey is almost, it runs a lot deeper than just starting a family. It has a lot to do with their identity. Because for a lot of us, whether or not and I tell people, until you've experienced it, you don't realize it. I'll use myself as an example. I thought I was the most woke, open-minded, or if I can't have kids, I'll adopt. I'll do this, until I started experiencing it myself. I didn't realize how much of my identity I had tied into my ability to reproduce or have my own child biologically. So for a lot of women, reaching that point is really difficult, because as much as you recognize the toll and you really want to be like, this is too much for me, it almost feels as though you are saying, I'm not a woman. right? And I agree that I'm not a woman, so I'm not doing this anymore. But like you said, for each person, for each couple is different. There are couples I know who go about it in terms of setting, okay, we'll try IVF for this long. We'll try this many rounds of IVF. If that doesn't work, then we are moving on to adoption. Like, they come up with a whole plan. Of course, carrying out the plan is a different thing. But they come up with a plan to kind of guide them through when they will decide
what they do.
What state. But it differs for everybody, right? And but for the women who also never reach that point, I think we also need to let them have that. In terms of, I think there's some women who will continuously pursue that dream of motherhood.
But you're 50 now. How do we support? How do we help you or enrich your life in some way or the other? Or is their decision to come to?
Yeah, it's their decision to come to. Right, it's their decision to come to, and in terms of the people around her supporting her, figuring out how they can plug into that journey and provide support along the way. But it's her journey, and it's her point to arrive at and be able to say, I'm not doing this anymore. But what I tell women, and something that I am trying to practice, women and men, is just, you know what I said earlier on about this sense of that's where your worth and your value comes from, plugging into other things.
Kind of finding your value in more places than just having children.
Exactly. But I've heard people say, and I've dealt with this as well, in terms of, it's not that, because I understand I have value in other things. I understand there's value in the work that I do. I know a lot of people find value in me in a range of different ways. But I think for a lot of women and men and couples, it's the frustration of not having an option, right? This idea that everybody gets to be parents and we don't have that option, right? And navigating that can be really, really difficult. But definitely, I think making your life about more than the pursuit of that really helps. Right, so plugging into other things.
Because I remember having a conversation, and I said, and I walked away feeling bad because I wasn't sure if I'd said the right thing or I hadn't.
Yeah.
But we're having this long conversation, and I said, maybe stop and count your blessings. And I know this is a big blessing that's important to you, but I felt that this person had so much else going on. And even though this was important, it had kind of sucked the life completely out of her. And it was a conversation I'd never had with her. And I'd chosen not to have till she opened up about it. Because I also feel like when people want to talk about something, they'll bring it up. So I had said over time, a very close friend of mine, never talked about it. And after a couple of years, I said, you know what? I don't want you to feel like I don't care, so I've never brought it up. But if ever you want to talk about this, I'm here. Because I can imagine you're thinking, oh, so okay, I won't even check on me and ask me how this is going. Because that double-edged sword of,
should I say something?
Should I say something? Should I not say anything? Yeah. And so then we got talking about it. And when I said that, it didn't seem to make her feel any better.
Yeah.
Right? And so I walked away feeling like, oh, did I say the wrong thing? Could I have, or should I have just left her alone, right? Even though she didn't feel better in that moment, I know we've had follow-up conversations where she says she is trying to refocus, she is trying to be a little bit more positive about the other things, because the reality is that shouldn't define who she is. But I'm just, and this is not a question, this is just me kind of contributing to the conversation and saying that even with me who thinks that I am, like you said, woke or sensitive or understanding, it's like walking on eggshells when you're having these conversations with someone.
Yeah. You know what works?
What?
Asking them what they need.
Thank you.
Yeah, ask them. And I know it works because it works. It's worked for other people. It works for me. Asking Carol, do you want to talk about this? Carol, what do you need to be validated on? What do you need to hear? What do you think might be helpful to hear? What might be helpful for us to do? Right. And a lot of times, sometimes you might get, I don't know, because sometimes you also...
Because they don't know.
You don't know. But then every once in a while, I might know that, no, I need you to validate me on this. I need some validation around this. Or maybe I need to spend the day actually not thinking about this. Can we do something completely different? Or, oh, can you bring me some food? Like, just
whatever it is.
Whatever it is.
Yeah. That makes them feel supported.
Exactly.
Or belong.
Yes. So sometimes they won't know, but I think for the moments where they do know, and they can tell you specifically what they need, is always worth asking. Right. So I think that's one helpful tip.
Okay.
Yeah.
Final comments?
Final comments, I always like to go back to me, the way I view life. And once again, maybe it has to do with the work that I do. I think that as long as one person experiences something, then it is everybody's issue. And so I think whether it has to do with this, starting, couples having difficulty starting a family, whether it has to do with mental health challenges, whether it has to do with chronic illness, whatever it might be, I think we all need to be a little bit more responsible for each other in terms of looking out and caring for each other, and not taking a stance on, if it doesn't impact me, I'm not going to speak on it, right? Because I think that is what often leads to the feeling of isolation that a lot of people have around these really sensitive and difficult issues. And the other thing I'll say is, whenever you're in doubt, ask, right? Depending on the level of relationship, ask, okay, if I did this, did you feel like, what was it insensitive? How did it make it? Just ask, right? And I think a lot of, when somebody's going through something, they really appreciate knowing that you're being intentional about how your
it affects them, or how you show up in that relationship.
Exactly. Because I think we tend to be very prescriptive in terms of...
That's the judgmental side of us. Like, yes, we've got it figured out. No, you haven't got it figured out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So approaching it more from ask what they need. Ask what it's like. Ask them, listen, I don't know what this feels like. Do you mind sharing? Do you mind telling me? And then also doing your research. I think whenever you're supporting somebody through something, once again, I don't think the burden should be on them to educate you, because that's a lot in addition to everything they're dealing with. So you go off and do your own research. I've always said this, my support system is amazing. And one of the things they consistently do, whether it's friends or families, they kind of go off and do their own research about the condition I have, right? So when they come to me, sometimes they have questions, but mostly I can tell they've gone and read.
Yes. And they understand the context of it. Yeah.
And that is always helpful. And I know, switching to mental health, to people who have mental health conditions, really appreciate when you're talking to them and they can tell, no, you've kind of read up on this thing. And I think those are some of the ways we can look out and support each other.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you too.
It's really good to have these conversations, and I appreciate you agreeing to have the conversation.
Thank you.
We're at evening.
Yeah.
And normally I should be kind of loading you up with vodka and things, and but this is yet another non-alcoholic cocktail.
Okay.
Do you want to try it?
I will try.
What's in it?
The color kind of leads me in a specific direction already. Okay.
You were thinking?
Yeah.
There's no.
There's no. Okay. Once again, do I taste?
You taste like a mixed fruits drink. But how did I get that color?
There isn't any honey in here, is there? Okay, you've got me.
Cheers. Stir it up. Thank you.
You really got me.